And I completely agree with you. I mean, anybody, regardless of what I say or what anyone else says, you should do your own homework. I mean, it's buying a dietary supplement, in my view, is no different than buying a car or a house or a watch or anything else. If you buy something and you haven't informed yourself, well, you're probably making a fairly uninformed decision on what you're buying. So the brown rice is where that next layer, that brown layer that gives it the brown color, that's the rice bran. But when that gets stripped off for 70 to 80% of the rice that's sold, now you just have that white endosperm that's left, and you've thrown away all the good nutrition that Mother Nature provides us in this amazing plant. But even still, trying to eat enough rice bran every day by eating your, 1 cup or whatever servings of brown rice every day would probably be difficult if you were in the face of something, very significant like Alzheimer's or cancer or heart disease or something else. So trying to get those types of nutrients that are very special and very effective, yet no one gets them in their food, that's where you need a dietary supplement.
Do dietary supplements actually work? How do they work? Do dietary supplements expire? Well, it can be challenging to navigate this world of dietary supplements and knowing whether it's worth, spending your money on. And we definitely, if we're passionate about biohacking, want to make sure that we're getting the best of the best, right? The Bobs of dietary supplements. So to help us navigate these challenging waters around personal development and dietary supplements, we have our expert guest, Dr. John Lewis, who is the founder and creator of Dr. Lewis Nutrition, and he'll be sharing with us his expertise on dietary supplements and how we can make sure that we're getting the most bang for our buck. Dr. Lewis is a PhD and associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine and the founder and president of Dr. Lewis Nutrition. He is a diplomat, faculty member, and advisor of the Medical Wellness Association and has been the principal investigator of over 30 different studies in the research center. During that time, he either directly raised or indirectly supported raising over $23 million in grants, gifts, and contracts for research studies and clinical trials and educational programs for medical students. He has completed groundbreaking research around multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, and other chronic diseases. So, without further ado, let's meet Dr. Lewis. Dr. Lewis, welcome to the Mental Health Toolbox, and thank you for making time to be on today.
Thank you, Patrick. It's my pleasure to be here. I look forward to our conversation today. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, absolutely. And if anybody wants to check out the work you're doing, we believe in tools up front here. So again, you can just head over to drlewisnutrition.com. If you want to check that out, of course, we'll link everything up in the show notes. Well, Dr. Lewis, how did you get into this space of dietary supplements?
Thank you. Well, it started really from my personal interest in nutrition way back in my earlier youth, I guess you could say, when I was getting into drug-free competitive bodybuilding in college. I started looking at how food and everything we put into our mouth affects our performance. But my bodybuilding career didn't last that long. After a few years of doing that, I realized pursuing such narcissistic activity was way too intense, too challenging. I still love my weight training routine that I do every day, but man, bodybuilding is a whole different beast. And if you're not willing to take drugs, quite frankly, you're not going to make much money at it. You're not going to really end up achieving much other than, maybe having a few trophies on your shelf that I guess you might feel proud of. But I don't know. I mean, and with all due respect to the people out there that do take drugs, they still have to work very hard. It's not like they just, stick a needle in their arm or their butt and then they grow. They still have to work very hard. But
Sure.
But I've had an interest in nutrition for a very long time. And back in those earlier days, I mean, I think, I was using things like creatine, which I'm still a big fan of, and inositol, and, maybe like your typical protein powder. But I really didn't have any clue until I got way down the road and I shift my focus from more of a sports performance, physical performance perspective to a health perspective. And then was able to, just through, being in the right place at the right time, fate, whatever you want to call it, meeting a couple of people who turned me on to the power of polysaccharides that I had literally no clue about in graduate school. The only thing I knew saccharides were good for was a fuel source for our cells.
Mm-hmm.
But thanks to meeting Dr. Reg McDaniel, who introduced me to the aloe vera side of life, and Miss Barbara Kimley, who introduced me to the rice bran side of life, both of those individuals just completely changed not only my career, but my life, really. And so it was really with meeting those two people almost 20 years ago now that I began to look at dietary supplements in a much different light. And I know it's easy, you hear all these stories. I mean, I just read something about this company, Balance of Nature, I believe. I've seen their TV commercials all over the place. They're promoting this encapsulated fruit and vegetable product. I don't know if you've seen it.
I think I have, yeah.
Well, they just recently got shut down.
Oh.
Yeah, FDA decided through some ongoing litigation and legal action that they were making disease claims around their products. And so the judge in whatever court said, okay, you got to go out of business, basically, which is very sad. I mean, their ads to me on TV looked very innocuous. I didn't see any major disease claims, so I don't know what they were doing on social media or maybe even in other places. But anyway, it's a shame that, you have actors like that, if they are truly a bad actor, that gives the entire industry a bad name. And so, you have to be careful with things like making the use of claims. And maybe it's also a good point to share with you and your listeners that I don't want anybody to say, from our conversation today, that Lewis said that you could use nutrition or dietary supplements to treat, cure, manage, mitigate disease. You'll never hear me say that. I don't ever say that. I'm very FTC compliant when it comes to that kind of use of the language. So please, anyone who listens to us today, don't ever accuse me of saying that, because I'm not. But anyway, circling all this back around, sorry for being a little long-winded or tangential, but
No, it's important. It's important because we certainly need to be careful about the statements we make. And even as a mental health professional, I have to be careful about making any statements, especially in the YouTube world and online space, about any kind of medical advice, right? In that sense, it's strictly educational and, thought-provoking material. Everybody should be doing their own research and consulting with their doctors, and not to just take whatever snippet they see on the internet as gospel, right?
That's right. Well, I could take it a step further and say the Food and Drug Cosmetic Act, I believe, of 1933, really puts us in the bind that we are still in today, in the sense of we can't exactly tell the truth when it comes to, talking about our research that we conducted. And as you mentioned in introducing me, I have a very long and extensive career in academics that I left behind after about 20 years. I got tired of begging the government and foundations for money to do research. It's not exactly a pleasant way to make a living, but along the way, after meeting Dr. McDaniel and Miss Kimley and conducting all these clinical trials, we ended up discovering some really incredible things. And, but, I'm limited in how I can talk about those things, again, in this context, because I could be accused of presenting or promoting a nutritional supplement, a dietary supplement, of being curing or treating disease. So it's really kind of ridiculous the way the law works. And I completely agree with you. I mean, anybody, regardless of what I say or what anyone else says, you should do your own homework. I mean, buying a dietary supplement, in my view, is no different than buying a car or a house or a watch or anything else. If you buy something and you haven't informed yourself, well, you're probably making a fairly uninformed decision on what you're buying. Same thing with dietary supplements. And
it can get very confusing too, the dietary supplement world. All the more reason to make sure that we're, looking at risk factors, right?
And, even with the bad actor out there who does occasionally get, either sent a warning letter of cease and desist, or in the case I just mentioned, they're actually being shut down. I mean, these are obviously serious charges, but still there are a lot of good companies out there like my own and other companies like Standard Process, Biotics, Premier Research Labs. I mean, these are companies, Life Extension, these are companies I've worked with in the past who have actually funded research at the University of Miami with my lab. And so, they're actually trying to put their money where their mouth is in terms of saying, okay, here we have this product. We put money behind it, or we are going to put money behind it. And we want to show that it does something. I mean, to me, that's a huge, huge feather in their cap, so to speak, in terms of saying, hey, I believe in what I have. I believe in what this does, and I'm going to test it and see what the results are. So that was a lot of, my career prior to leaving academics and going into business. I worked with all these companies as my interest grew outside of, not just the polysaccharide niche that I've really created for myself, but with some of these other vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients as well. But I believe that, again, this is my own opinion. I'm sure lots of people don't agree with me, but when I first got into this many, many years ago, I was kind of the opinion that you could get all the nutrition you needed from just food. I really didn't think that, outside of cases where, again, you have a health challenge, a disease, a disorder, whatever, maybe you need more vitamin C, vitamin D, calcium, magnesium, whatever the case may be. And so I thought that, really, if you ate a good diet, and of course we know that's a very controversial and argumentative thing as well, just saying what's a good diet, right. to the average person.
Pandora's box. Yeah.
That's right. You got people that are eating plant-based like me, or vegan. I don't even like to use that word that much because too many people associate vegan with being like a religious zealot, which I'm not. And then you have the other extreme, now this carnivore wave that I kind of laugh at and think is hilarious and silly. But then, of course, you've got the paleo people and the keto people and the zone and South Beach and Atkins and on and on and on. So, you've got so many wide ranges of opinions and beliefs on food. But once I saw what these polysaccharides were doing and the fact that you can't get them from food, or it'd be very difficult. I don't know about you. I don't know anyone who eats aloe vera. Do you?
No, I can't say
exactly. Exactly. I mean, most people think of aloe vera as a topical purpose for either a sunburn or a cut or a wound or something, which is fine application. Right. But how many times do you think of, somebody popping their aloe vera interleaf gel? You wouldn't even think of that.
Exactly.
Same thing with the polysaccharides from the rice bran. Most of the world, I think like 70–80% of the rice sold in the world is white rice. Well, that's the white endosperm that's left once the rice is brought in from the field, put through the milling process. You have the outer husk that you can eat. It's totally inedible. So that gets stripped off. The next layer is the rice bran, which is what gives us brown rice, which is what I prefer to eat. I don't know about you. I'm not really that big of a fan of white rice. I'll eat it if I have nothing else, but I like my brown rice most days of the week. So the brown rice is where that next layer, that brown layer that gives it the brown color, that's the rice bran. But when that gets stripped off for 70–80% of the rice that's sold, now you just have that white endosperm that's left, and you've thrown away all the good nutrition that Mother Nature provides us in this amazing plant. But even still, trying to eat enough rice bran every day by eating your, 1 cup or whatever servings of brown rice every day would probably be difficult if you were in the face of something, very significant like Alzheimer's or cancer or heart disease or something else. So trying to get those types of nutrients that are very special and very effective, yet no one gets them in their food, that's where you need a dietary supplement. And again, that's my opinion. I'm just expressing my freedom of speech here, but it's very difficult to get those polysaccharides in any other way. Of course, these are not the only sources of polysaccharides. You can get polysaccharides from lots of different mushrooms, different types of seaweed. We didn't look at any of those sources of polysaccharides in our research, so I can't really speak to those as intelligently. But what we showed with our research with these polysaccharide complexes based on aloe vera, mostly aloe vera and rice bran, were just beyond anything I ever expected. And it just again, kind of circling all the way back to my original thought or statement here, that you really do need dietary supplements, and not just talking about if you have an existing health challenge, but I'm talking about prevention as well. I mean, I've been on this formula now for over 10 years. I've had my mother on it for over 15. Our daughter just turned 4 last month. And when we started introducing solid food in her diet at 6 months of age, I started giving her this formula. My wife was taking it while she was pregnant all the way through her pregnancy with Angie. So, from literally pregnancy to infancy, all the way to the end of life, our cells use all of these polysaccharides. I mean, literally every 30 plus trillion cells in our body will utilize these things, and utilize them like literally rocket fuel. I mean, they're just so dynamic and so efficacious in their actions, and how much information they provide that the genes recognize. They take that information that's coded in these complex molecules, and then they tell the cells how to function. And that is just, that's basically the bioengineering of life. That could not be more fundamental to our functioning. And so, kind of linking that now to the medical side, or the pharmacological side, it's a very different paradigm, right? I mean, you're talking about taking raw materials that Mother Nature provides to us, that again, our cells utilize, directed by the genes that don't do anything until they receive information from the environment. And then once they get that coded information, and these polysaccharides, by the way, are so complex, they have even more coded material in them than amino acids and fatty acids do. And so when they take that information and then they tell the cells what to do, that's enabling our body to maintain homeostasis, or if we're out of homeostasis, to try to get it back. And that's allowing the body to heal and restore itself, which is a completely different paradigm from the pharmacological one, where Big Pharma takes a chemical that 80% of the time is actually something that Mother Nature provided us, and then they modify the molecule to make it synthetic so that they can get a patent, blah, 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 blah. But they take that molecule that's now synthesized, and they try to alter a metabolic pathway to deal with a symptom of a disease or one disease. So pharmacology alters our metabolic pathways, and that's why we have the black box effect, the negative side effects, whereas nutrition enables our physiology. And so it's a completely different paradigm. And I want to make sure our listeners are very clear about all that. And that's what these polysaccharides, along with vitamins and minerals and oxygen and other elements, cofactors, metabolism, on and on, all these different things that we get through what Mother Nature provides us, those are the things that enable our cells to function properly, allows basically, once again, our bioengineering of life.
Wow. Thank you so much. I've never heard it explained that way. That makes a lot of sense, that we want to work with Mother Nature, not try to manipulate it so much all the time. Right.
Exactly. And, going back to your sort of setting this conversation up about, dietary supplements again, I'm recognizing that they're, it's like any other industry, right? I mean, bad actors all over the place. Look at what happened. Do you recall the story? It was exposed just a couple of years ago about, mentioning something close to my work, Alzheimer's, this whole notion of all this money that's been spent. It's literally billions of dollars that have been spent pursuing this anti-beta amyloid, trying to create some sort of a chemical or a drug that can counteract the beta amyloid buildup that is one of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease, or it's one of the leading theories of why people get Alzheimer's disease. Well, one of the papers that was originally, I think it was from the University of Minnesota. I don't remember the name of the investigator. I hope he's in jail, or whoever, whatever lab this was, but they fabricated a bunch of their data that led to all this money being spent going down this line of research, looking at how to counteract beta amyloid in Alzheimer's. And it ended up being a total fraud, basically. So, it's not just the dietary supplement industry that has bad actors. There are bad actors all over the place. But that's one example of, how I don't know that necessarily so many people lost their lives due to all this wasted money and time and resources, but certainly when, people were thinking, oh, well, this is an avenue that we're going to pursue to try to cure this disease, it turned out to basically be a bunch of hogwash because the data were fabricated. And so, again, this it seems like the environment we live in today, generally speaking, in our society, where we have to be careful with, being aware of bad actors that are potentially doing things for nefarious reasons, either to get paid off or control, power, just take your pick of what human beings get motivated by. But I think it's important, again, to, as I mentioned earlier, to do your research when you do decide to take a dietary supplement. But it is my belief that we do need, based on all the epidemics of chronic diseases that we have in our country today, that people need to be mindful and aware of the benefit of certain dietary supplements. For example, I didn't even touch on vitamin D yet. So we had a series of papers we published prior to me leaving academics where we looked at vitamin D, and it turned out, I think 70% of our sample, and these are people in South Florida. So, you think, here we are living in the Sunshine State, everybody ought to be at a decent level of vitamin D, but like 70%, I think we had almost 120 people in that study. And like 70% of the people in our study were either insufficient or deficient in their vitamin D level.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Even,
it's kind of scary.
and even people in South Florida are not getting enough sun exposure because of whatever reason, just staying inside all day and getting very little sunlight, which is our best source of vitamin D. But if you're not getting out in the sun every day, and if you live, say, in the northern latitudes where maybe it's not as sunny like it is here in Florida, I would highly recommend that you take a vitamin D supplement, because vitamin D interacts with at least, I think the last number I saw was 4,400 or so genes. Out of our 35, 40,000 genes, vitamin D has been shown to have a role in at least 10% of those, if not more. So, I mean, we're talking about a huge number of our genes where vitamin D plays a significant role. And it's not just about bone health, it's about literally every major organ system. And so if your vitamin level is insufficient or deficient, you're exposing yourself to great risk of lots of different chronic diseases down the road, because eventually your body can't continue compensating for you not getting enough of it into your system every day. And one of the hallmarks of chronic disease is that we have micronutrient deficiency over a long period of time. We can deal with it because of our body's innate intelligence in the short term. We can deal with it. Our body has the ability to manipulate metabolic pathways to counteract or, again, deal with limited exposure to the vitamins and minerals that it needs. It will sacrifice your longevity, though, to deal with short-term survival. But again, you live, years and decades later, and then those short-term deficiencies turn into chronic exposures that then result you in having cancer, heart disease, diabetes, et cetera, all these different things that are plaguing us as a society today. So vitamin D is a no-brainer. I mean, it's just so necessary for our survival, and it's so crucial to so many different functions that our cells take part in, that if you're not keeping up with your vitamin D level, you're making a big mistake. It's inexpensive to get it checked, and a dietary supplement is relatively inexpensive. If you're destitute and on the street, okay, fine, you can't afford it. But for all the rest of us, you should be taking your vitamin D every day if you're not getting out in the sun at least, several times per week, allowing the sun to hit most of your body. So that's just another little, tangent to this whole story.
No, I appreciate that. Vitamin D is a huge talking point in the mental health world, because it has been said to be linked to depression, low vitamin D levels,
Right.
and among other things. And it's not one of those that's easy to replenish. I've heard it said that it takes 6 months to a year to replenish your vitamin D because it's stored in your fat tissues.
Right.
I don't know if that's true, but it's certainly worth taking.
It depends on where you start out. It depends on your deficiency level, but sure, it could take a while.
Yeah. Dr. Lewis, I'm going to pause our recording for just a second, because I know vitamin D is a big topic, and I appreciate you sharing on that, Dr. Lewis, because like you said initially, we could talk for hours about supplementation. I have at least 50 questions off just top of my tongue. It's like tip of my tongue is like, okay, so if we're looking at vitamin D, okay, if we're going to supplement, which supplements should we take? How long should we take it? How long does it take to
Right.
repair vitamin D deficiency? And I live in California, and I take vitamin D supplements because I just know, like, hey, I don't want to. Okay, maybe I pee some of it out, but I don't want to take any chances.
That's
It's,
right.
yeah, and I know it's
Well,
complicated, right?
well, for just to let our listeners know, I take 4,000 units a day. My level when I get checked, I usually get my levels checked about once a year, and my level is usually around 60. So you're deficient if you're below 20. You're insufficient if you're below 29. So you definitely want to be above 30. And of course, there's a debate regarding what's optimal or what's the most beneficial level. I've got a friend who's a pharmacist. He also lives in California. He tries to keep his above 100. I mean, and he's been doing it a long time. He's an elderly man and he's still in really good health. So, he may be right for all I know. But I think, it's like 60 to 80. You're like in my opinion, you're in the sweet spot. So that's where I try to be.
Yeah, and that's something worth asking your primary doctor about when they do your panel, right?
Absolutely.
As they want to form my with my vitamin D, I want to see it. I want to know. I want to know, because just because you're in range doesn't necessarily mean it's optimal, right?
That's right. No, exactly. I mean, same with our recommended dietary allowances. I mean, we've been recommending for years people to take 100 milligrams or 90 milligrams per day of vitamin C. That's a joke. I mean, that was based on very, very old research to prevent scurvy. That doesn't have anything to do with, being in optimal health. So people shouldn't get confused about the RDI for vitamins and minerals, because those are really based on, again, just keeping you at a threshold to prevent disease like scurvy or rickets or, things that used to kill humans. That doesn't mean those values are for optimal health at all.
Right. And that's what we want to know. Like, how do we optimize our health, right?
That's right.
How do we give our bodies the best shot, right? Within reason.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, and that's exactly why I take these polysaccharides every day. I mean, again, I don't need them to live. They're not essential like oxygen or another vitamin and mineral, but they are just so dynamic. And all of the research that we conducted that we've published, we have 4 papers we published from our Alzheimer's clinical trial. We have 2 papers we published from our multiple sclerosis trial. We have a 3rd one currently under review. And, again, Patrick, I mean, without sounding completely arrogant, I would put our results up against pretty much anybody's in terms of the efficacy of these things and the results that we've showed. I can't think of anything else that, you could do that's better. And if you're of the opinion that dietary supplements are, I don't know, expensive, or, you just don't think they're worth it, well, then I would say to you, are you the typical American that goes to Starbucks every day and spends 8 or I don't know how much money, 8 or 10, I'm not a coffee drinker, but
yeah.
That's right. But, if you're spending 8 or 10 bucks
most of the time, just because I don't want to spend $5 on a cup of black coffee, because I'm not big on sugar.
Saying, like, people just drop money left and right. They don't even consider, what that means. They're just doing it because of, I don't know, habit or preference or whatever. But if you're spending that much money on Starbucks every day and you think dietary supplements are too expensive, well, then I would encourage you to maybe do an inventory of your budget and say, well, wait a minute, I can probably do without this latte from Starbucks for whatever amount of money, when I can take dietary supplements for a couple of bucks per day that would make it potentially make a huge difference in my health and my well-being for many, many years and hopefully the rest of my life. So.
Well, absolutely. And that's why we have these conversations, because I think, like with anything, it comes down to understanding, right? Not just necessarily getting on a trend, right? Or taking a shotgun approach to things, but understanding the why. And what's at risk? What's the cost? What's the payout? What's the sacrifice? And why are we sacrificing, or why are we trying to implement certain habits into our life? Where does that move the needle in the large scheme of things, right? And the same
That's
thing can
right.
be said about, sugar and inflammation and how much is too much and when, and versus like a plant-based diet or a keto diet or a whatever, if we want to get on these, put it, our diet into these boxes, why? I think is always the big question, what's the long-term impact? And one of the reasons I love to study blue zones, as they're
Mhm.
called, is because there's these common threads throughout the world, and these quote healthiest populations that live the longest and have the least amount of diseases, and there's got to be some common threads, and there are, which makes
They
it
are.
fascinating. And I
Absolutely.
think if we know which levers to pull, what things are going to give us the most results over, as opposed to spinning our wheels on things that don't get us very far. Is always the question I have in my head. And when I'm thinking about my supplements, I think about, okay, which ones have the most research backed behind them, right? And that's why I'm a huge fan of beetroot. I'm a huge fan of beetroot. I put
Yes,
beetroot powder in all of my smoothies, just because there's so much research behind beets and how cool
yep.
they are,
They're amazing.
for
Amazing
our
food.
bodies.
That's
So
right.
that D3, magnesium, daily vitamin, fish oil, the big guns. So, but that begs the question, and I'm dying to ask you, why polysaccharides? What are they? What I mean, we drove by a little bit, but what is a polysaccharide? Why are they so important? And why did you dedicate so much research and resources to this particular supplement or micronutrient?
Well, you read my mind because I just realized I'd mentioned this word several times and hadn't even gone down the road of defining it yet. But you also said the word sugar just a moment ago related to inflammation. And of course, I mean, anybody who's been alive and been an adult for the last 20, 30, 40 years probably is aware of at least some information through the mass media identifying sugar as bad, right? I mean, I think can't speak for every citizen in the world, but I think the average American, when he or she hears the word sugar, the immediate thought is, oh, bad, right? Like, it's sugar bad. There's
Demonized.
no debate. But the
Black white.
problem, with that line of thinking is that, first of all, sugar is not a sugar, meaning that Mother Nature provides us with lots of different sugars. So one characteristic of a sugar is its source. So high fructose corn syrup is a simple sugar that we know spikes your glucose, spikes your insulin. Typically, if you're consuming that regularly, you're probably setting yourself up for some sort of metabolic disease. And, generally, I think people would agree that's not the kind of sugar you want to consume. If you haven't eliminated it, or at least reduced it, try to eliminate it at some point. But the complex polysaccharides, I could have said complex sugar, and people would probably said, "Wow, that guy Lewis is nuts. He's talking about sugars being good for you." But again, it goes back to the source. So the ones from aloe vera and rice bran, and I mentioned others like mushrooms and seaweed. These are complex sugars that are very, very beneficial for us. And so for the people out there promoting, again, the carnivore, they're another level, but the paleo people, I tell these people all the time, look, a couple of 100 milligrams to maybe 1 or 2 grams of these polysaccharides per day is not going to kick you out of ketosis. It's not going to screw up your paleo keto orientation. It's just a little bit of material compared to the whatever you're eating, 2 or 3 or 4,000 calories per day. It's a tiny little amount of material relative to that entire amount of food you're eating, but it has so much power, so much pop to what it can do for your cells that you're really kind of foolish to just, throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. But backing up for just a moment, so you have high fructose corn syrup, which is a monosaccharide, and then you have sucrose, which is a disaccharide. It's a little bit more complex. And then you have these polysaccharides, which are literally hundreds of these glucose units attached together with these glycosidic bonds that just have so much coded information in them, that are the most complex compounds in nutritional biochemistry, essentially. I mean, they're way more complex than even amino acids and fatty acids. So they're just
Oh, yeah, I remember in my biochemistry class in college, because I was originally doing pre-med, and I remember them just going on and on about how beautiful and wonderful these polysaccharides are. And I couldn't
exactly.
remember why, like what made them so special, right? So I'm
That's
glad you're
right.
here to remind me.
Well, it's all that complexity and all that structure that again is coded information that our genes respond to and recognize to tell the cells how to function properly. So again, I want, if nothing, if no one remembers anything else I said today, at least remember that not all sugar is bad for you. And just to say equate sugar with bad is a very ignorant way of thinking. And it's quite frankly, it's not a good use of our language either. It's just being, not particular with how you should associate words and their meanings. So I want people to be mindful of the use of the word sugar. It doesn't, just because somebody says sugar does not necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It depends on the source of it, and it depends on its chemical structure, its biochemical structure. Now,
Semantics.
yes. Now, how I got into all this, of course, I mentioned the two people that I always like to acknowledge for changing my life: Dr. McDaniel on the aloe vera side, and Miss Kimley on the rice bran side. I mean, they just, again, introduced me to what was happening in their lives. Dr. McDaniel, I would say, much more dynamically in the sense of having all of these cases where, everything from HIV to cancer to heart disease to diabetes to even dwarfism in children, all other sorts of genetic defects that people had just incredible, amazing responses to once they started taking these polysaccharides. And again, I'm not talking about treating disease. I'm talking about providing the raw materials that the body needs to function properly. And then in the case of Miss Kimley, she was taking this hydrolyzed rice bran where, after having had metastatic cancer from her thyroid, and then went through surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, the entire conventional spectrum of treatment, was still told she only had about 6 months to live. I mean, you can imagine how devastating that was. And she sent me a letter talking about her case and her life and how she basically was able to survive all of that from taking this hydrolyzed rice bran that gave her another nine years, actually. So like 8.5, 9 years beyond this 6-month terminal prognosis that she had gotten, in this rice bran, in her view of the world, saved her life. So when I started looking at everything that these two people were telling me, and they didn't know each other, by the way. Miss Kimley was living here in the Fort Lauderdale area, and Dr. McDaniel still lives in the Dallas area. So they didn't know each other. I mean, they just kind of came into my life around the same time. But again, it just completely changed my life. And then thanks to the generosity of a family who had lost 4 family members to Alzheimer's disease, they heard Dr. McDaniel giving a lecture one day, and they offered to make a gift to extend nutritional research if it would be done in people with Alzheimer's. They were very, generous and kind. They only had one requirement, and that was, again, to run the study in people with Alzheimer's. So that was the only reason, Patrick, that we even had the opportunity to run the study that we ran. We were able to run that sister study with MS patients as well, but it was really through the generosity of this one family that we were able to do this study, because, as I'm sure you probably know, most dietary supplement companies don't have big pharma's budget, and NIH is not interested in sponsoring dietary supplement research or nutrition research to the same degree that it is interested in funding pharmaceutical or pharmacological research, because at the end of the day, what does NIH want? They want to be able to do licensing deals with big pharma and make millions and billions of dollars. And they can't see that avenue with doing anything, through nutrition or through a natural compound. So it's an incredibly difficult journey. And it makes me want to almost pull my hair out when I hear people complaining about the lack of research on nutrition. And I'm like, well, because you don't understand how the system works. If you understood how the system works, you wouldn't be criticizing people for not having, done more research. Because, I mean, we literally, even after getting the gift from this family that with, their kind and gracious offer, we still had to pinch. I mean, you want to talk about squeezing every drop of blood out of pennies and nickels and dimes. That's what we had to do to run this study to have something worthwhile at the end of the day. But it's completely changed my life. And, again, I eventually, after trying to get more funding out of NIH, speaking of which, and the Alzheimer's Association, after we published our first paper from the Alzheimer's study, I got literally nothing in response. I got that much in response. I decided that, I was too young. I was too motivated to do other things to spend the next 20, 30, 40 years of my life in academics, banging my head against the wall, trying to listen to these bureaucrats, hear our message. Basically, it wasn't like I was just saying, here's an idea. No, I'm saying, here, we have data plus an idea. Help us take the next step in our research program. And I couldn't do that. And so that was kind of the beginning of the end after, seeing these people completely reject what I was proposing to continue doing. And just, and then I decided to leave academics and go into business. But just to briefly tell our listeners, what we showed in the Alzheimer's study, we looked at people with moderate to severe disease, which are, again, to continue pounding against big pharma. And those are the people big pharma care nothing about. They're not interested in trying to treat people at that level of severity. They look at them as pretty much lost cases or lost causes. But we wanted to enroll the sickest people. We felt like it was important to give people with this terrible disease that's now the 6th leading killer of Americans. It's costing us somewhere between $500 billion and $1 trillion per year in direct and indirect costs. I mean, it's just an extraordinary amount of money. There are roughly 6 million Americans who have Alzheimer's, another 8 million with different forms of dementia. So even though it's not a significant number of the population in terms of number of people like diabetes or, other depression, other things that are more common, but still with that number and translating that or correlating or relating that to the amount of money that it costs is just staggering. And there is no cure. Forget even a cure. The scientific community can't even come to a consensus or an agreement about what causes the disease, let alone, trying to figure out how to treat it. So literally, if you get diagnosed with dementia and the Alzheimer's type, I mean, it's pretty much a death sentence at this point from a conventional perspective. So hopefully down the road, if we can ever finally get our system shifted from, treatment to truly prevention, I believe we can end up getting to a point where we don't have a lot of people with Alzheimer's and dementia. We end up preventing that stuff. That's another conversation, but
that's a beautiful mission, right? Is to
it would be absolutely
work ourselves out of business. Yeah. I feel the same way about mental health, and I'm sure that's why I love having these talks with people in your profession, on your side, in the physical health space, is because, you can't really separate the two. Right?
No, you can't.
You can't really separate the two.
No, you can't. Absolutely not. But we put people on our formulation, this polysaccharide-based formulation, for months. We did the neuropsych testing at baseline, 3, 6, 9, and 12 months. The neuropsychologist was incredible. I mean, she'd been doing that for her whole career, just really, really knowledgeable and experienced about doing cognitive assessment on people. And then due to limitation in the budget, we only were able to draw blood at baseline in 12 months. But we ended up showing, Patrick, we were hopeful and optimistic based on some of Dr. McDaniel's previous cases, but we ended up showing clinically and statistically significant improvement in cognitive function at 9 and 12 months, according to the ADAS-Cog, which is, I'm sure you probably know, that's the gold standard for assessing cognition, particularly in people with dementia. So we were blown away. And I want you to make sure you heard what I said correctly. Clinically and statistically significant improvement. That's unheard of. I mean, that's literally unheard of. And that first paper was published in 2013. And that's why I was so high. I was just literally on cloud 9 thinking, oh my gosh, like we're really onto something amazing here. And then, after getting nothing in response from NIH and Alzheimer's Association, I went from, cloud 9 to under the valley, between the mountains. But we also showed on the cellular side, we showed an improvement in overall immune function according to the CD4-CD8 ratio, which is not just important for people with Alzheimer's, that's important for all of us. We want our helper to cytotoxic cells, that ratio to be relatively high, and we showed a nice improvement in that. We showed a decrease in TNF-alpha and VEGF. Those two inflammatory markers are historically looked at in people with heart disease and cancer. Our paper was probably the first paper that showed that. We showed just under a 300% increase in adult stem cell production according to CD14 cells. So, you put all this together. I mean, it was just such a beautiful picture. The only thing we had missing in that first study, and by the way, we are trying to raise money for another study, but the only thing that we really were missing in that first study was the imaging data. If we had to been able to look at the morphology of the brain with, a CT scan or something, that would have been the icing on the cake. But nonetheless, when you look at the clinical change and then how that was supported by lowering inflammation, improving overall immune function, improving that adult stem cell production process, to us, I mean, that just created a really beautiful picture of how all of those cellular changes supported the practical or the clinical side. And so it was just, I mean, we were so excited. In fact, that paper still is the only paper in my career. I'm up to about 190 publications in my career at this point, but that was the only paper in my career that I published where the editor of the journal actually called me and said, "Wow, Dr. Lewis, this is an exciting paper. As soon as the reviewers get this back, I'm like publishing it like that." Mm-hmm. Like it literally was like, I think less than a 30-day review, which, for you or any of your listeners who know it, that's practically unheard of. Hardly ever any paper ever gets published that quickly or accepted for publication. But we also just published a fourth paper this past year, just a few months ago, even though academic publishing is not really my intention, or probably not even in my top 10 list of priorities as a businessman at this point. But I had an idea for looking at immune function and how that related to cognitive function, because I thought that was interesting, given that if you've looked into the literature on what's referred to as the Th1 to Th2 ratio, mm-hmm. and we have different components of our immune function: Th1, Th2, Th17, Th23, 33. I mean, there are lots of different components. But generally speaking, or globally speaking, the Th1 to Th2 is our ratio of pro to anti-inflammatory markers. I kid you not, when I first started working on this paper, I went to PubMed and I was trying to find, what else had been published out there on Alzheimer's. I could not find one other paper that had ever actually looked at this. I thought, wow, this is really cool. Like, we're going to have an opportunity to be the first group to actually publish what the Th1 to Th2 ratios look like in people with Alzheimer's disease. And so we had another study of healthy people where we looked at the exact same group of cytokines and growth factors. I kid you not, the numbers were staggering, and I'm happy to share all these papers with you if you'd like to read them at some point, or at least look at the abstracts.
Absolutely.
But the people with Alzheimer's were so Th1 dominant. I mean, their scores were just off the chart. And then the people that were healthy, all of their scores were like right around 1. They were maybe a little bit over or under 1.0. The difference was just staggering. And then over that 12-month intervention, we looked at 6 ratios. 5 of the 6 actually started going back toward less Th1 dominance. Mm-hmm. And then the icing on the cake was that the going back, sort of rebalancing, if you will, was correlated with improved cognitive function. I mean, it was just a beautiful paper. So that was the fourth paper. The 2 in between were related to brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and we correlated that with different markers of cognitive function in one paper and immune function in another. We were trying to find a little bit more mechanistic explanation for why we showed these improvements. Those 2 papers, in my opinion, weren't as exciting as the first one and now the fourth one. The 2 papers we published in the MS study, they again showed very similar findings, although not so much focused on cognitive function. One of the papers we looked at showed a dramatic decrease in infection. These polysaccharides also happen to be very anti-infectious, so very counteractive against virus, bacteria, fungus, other types of pathogens. But the people with MS went from like 8 infections at baseline down to 2.5 at 12 months. And one of the things I learned along the way in running that trial was that people with MS don't actually die from neurodegeneration. They ultimately die from infection.
Hmm.
So to be able to knock out that infection was just really, really nice. And then we also showed much to the, kind of same degree, although slightly different, we showed improvements in inflammation and in immune function as well. And then on the quality of life side, I mean, just across the board, the FAMS is widely considered the gold standard for assessing functionality in people with MS, highly statistically significant improvements, everything related to mood, pain, just the ability to like do your activities of daily living, all those different things, wildly statistically significant. And then we have this third paper that's currently under review that's kind of a sister paper to that fourth paper from the Alzheimer study looking at the Th1 to Th2 ratios. So I say all this to say that I'm very proud of our work. We've showed things that are, in my view, I can't, it's hard to find anything else quite as significant in terms of efficacy. I mean, I would challenge anybody listening to this conversation, don't take my word for it, go to PubMed yourself, try to find anything else that can show clinically and statistically significant improvement in cognitive function in people with moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease. I don't care if you're talking about the 5 FDA-approved drugs for dementia, a diet, exercise training, another dietary supplement, hyperbaric oxygen, music therapy, acupuncture. I don't care what intervention you want to look at. There's nothing else out there. We're the only people who have showed that. And so that to me is just why, it really inculcates and just sort of stamps for me why these polysaccharides are so important compared to anything else that you could do specifically for these kinds of health challenges, and broadly speaking in neurodegeneration. But we know that the organs, all this crosstalk going on between the different major organ systems, and particularly in our case, and looking at all these different immune function markers, mm-hmm. and then looking at things that were occurring on the clinical and the practical side, and how those things talk to each other. So all that's just really powerful information that I'm very proud of for all this work that my colleagues and I have done. And again, I'm continuing to talk to folks like yourself and spread this word and spread this message that, hey, you know what, if you have this disease, you actually can have the opportunity for some hope. It's not just a terminal or just one of these situations where, I just have to throw my hands up and I can't do anything. You can actually consider the opportunity to turning to the power of nutrition, or more specifically, the power of these polysaccharides to allow the body to help itself. And that's for me a very powerful message to try to share with people.
Oh, it is very powerful. And I really appreciate hearing it from the person who did the research, who's passionate about this mission, and the wonderful work you're doing. Makes me question, of course, so we know it's established now, right? I think we can all agree after listening to your research and the work you've been doing that polysaccharides are important, right?
Right.
How do we get them into our diet? What is the low-hanging fruit here in terms of what should we be factoring into our daily diet? Is there particular supplements we should be looking at? What's the practical application here?
Well, so I mean, without sounding like I'm jumping from scientist to, salesman, I mean, I don't want to give our listeners the wrong idea here, but, we have done the hard work, and thank you for, the compliments. And I am genuine. I don't have, there's nothing here for me to hide. I don't have an ulterior motive. I've put my name on my own product line. So it's not like I'm trying to hide behind, something else. The practical for me is try our product. You have nothing to lose. It's called Daily Brain Care. It's under the Dr. Lewis Nutrition brand. Again, as I mentioned earlier in our conversation, I don't know anyone who eats aloe vera. So aloe vera growing in our backyard, but I'm not going out here every day and, snipping leaves and sucking the gel down. It's not going to do the same thing. You have to have those polysaccharides concentrated in an amount that can be physiologically or therapeutically effective. And so, my colleagues and I, we've done all the hard work, really. I mean, it's now just taking it. The practical application is taking daily brain care. That's what we call our flagship product. That's based on not just the research from our lab at the University of Miami. This is going back with Dr. McDaniel and his colleagues at Texas A&M and other institutions practically 40 years. I mean, this has been going on for a very long time from investigators and scientists from around the country and even around the world. So I'm standing on the shoulders of giants who, I was just lucky to be in the right place at the right time and extended their work, and I'm gracious and humbled for all that opportunity. But yeah, I mean, anybody who wants to try out the benefit of this, of these compounds, try daily brain care. I can't think of, without sounding too arrogant, I can't think of any better strategy that you could try to take and help yourself and help your health.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And of course, that can be found at your site, drlewisnutrition.com.
Yes.
For sure. In addition to so we've established polysaccharides are important. We can get these via your supplements. In addition to polysaccharides, since I know you're such a health conscious person to begin with, which is obviously one of the reasons you're passionate about this research. You were a former, I don't know if you're still a bodybuilder, a former bodybuilder, you said.
Yes. Definitely
a fan of the plant-based diet. You look to be a lot more fit than me, so I would love some pointers. What would you say are kind of your musts, the boxes that you check, like when it comes to optimizing health in general, like just in your own experience, kind of what's important to kind of keep focused on, recalibrate too, if we kind of start to lose our way, like what should our cornerstone foundation be for optimal health?
Well, thank you for that question. This is actually one of my favorite questions to answer, because I think it is important to be, fully disclosing my, what I do every day to people, given that I am in the health and wellness space. So number one, I have, as you said, I've been eating a whole food plant-based diet now for 27 years. Some people refer to that as vegan. Whatever, if that word concerns you, then, don't use it. But I made a decision 27 years ago to stop eating animals. I mean, I just, based on my own life and the course of my life and what I thought made sense to me in the literature. And this wasn't just because of, I'm now an animal lover and it's all about, animal rights or the environment or spirituality, all those things. I'm not dismissing those. For some people, those are big deals. For me, they were sort of part of the reason why, but for me, health was the number one choice for me, the number one reason. And even based on the literature at that time, Patrick, and imagine, 27 years later, we have so much more information. I just was convinced, based on the science at that time, that eating plants was the best way to be healthy. And so that's why I chose to do it. But I eat a variety of fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, grains, legumes. I'm not into the anti-gluten thing. I think a lot of people, if you have an issue with wheat or gluten, it's actually not the wheat, it's the glyphosate. It's the glyphosate that gets dumped onto our crops. And so for me, that's another big tenet for me is my family and I, we eat almost entirely organic. And of course, there's, arguments about organic and local, and even if something's organic and then it's still shipped to you, what does that mean for the quality of the food, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are just so many layers to this. Mm-hmm. It's almost impossible to entirely peel that onion. But I think for me, organic is important. And again, I'm trusting in the system that, number one, that means the plant was not genetically modified. And number two, that means it was not treated with pesticides, herbicides, or other chemicals. I'm trusting that the system in this case works. So that's why I do choose to buy about, I'd say 95% of the products that we buy are organic. So for me, organic is very important. And then of course, besides daily brain care, I am taking, like you, I take vitamin D. I take magnesium every day. I take curcumin most days. I take vitamin K2. I like to take enzymes with my meals. I'd be if any of our listeners wants to, I'd be happy to share with you everything that I take. I take a B complex, vitamin C, zinc, copper, selenium. I mean, there are a number of things that I take. Again, I just believe that the worst thing that I'm doing to myself is I have expensive urine and poop.
Right, right.
Right. I mean, it's not going to hurt me. I'm not taking, ridiculous levels of any of these things, but I am taking levels that I believe are boosting my opportunity to have an optimal health status. And for me, that's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
On the performance side, I don't compete in bodybuilding anymore. Again, I did that for a few years back in my 20s, but it was just so stressful and so, difficult to try to work a full-time job, which in academics, it's beyond full-time. As you know, you're not working like a banker, with all due
Right.
respect to the
Yeah.
bankers. You're working like 70, 80 hours a week. And it just was very, very draining for me to try to work that hard in my profession and then still be a competitive bodybuilder. But for me, strength training is a very important of my routine every day. I do take the occasional day off, but I basically train 7 days a week. And then if my body says, you know what, you're feeling a little tired, you're feeling a little run down today, don't do anything. I listen to my body. I'll just say, okay, fine, I'm taking the day off. But I believe in daily activity. I think it's so incredibly important. It's, in my opinion, it's the number two behavior behind nutrition in terms of what we can do for ourselves. And so along with my training, I do take creatine. I am a big fan of creatine. I believe that, 5 to 10 grams a day of creatine is very beneficial. And as I'm sure you've probably heard now, it's being looked at beyond just for sports performance, but people are even looking at it for different brain health issues. I think there's a study going on, I forget at which institution right now, but for Parkinson's. So it's got a lot of amazing benefits, and I'm a big fan of creatine. So that's definitely a big part of my daily routine. Hydration, absolutely. I'm probably drinking somewhere between 3 and 4 liters of water per day of filtered water. I believe in hydration is very important. Sleep, I try to get somewhere between 7 and 8 hours of sleep every night. I think sleep is incredibly important. We're living, in this stressed out world today, and people are running around like lunatics and crazy people. And, if you're not sleeping well, then you're going to be one of those crazy people running around. And of course, in your neck of the woods of being a professional, stress management. I mean, for me, my exercise is my stress management. I have the ability to take any aggravation, frustration, stress, whatever, and fuel that into my exercise training. So that for me is the biggest way that I do my stress management. I do try to practice a little bit of meditation, but I'm pretty poor at it. So I don't consider myself to be any expert at meditating, but I do try to do a little bit of that. But in general, those are my, my go-tos or my daily habits that I've been doing for many, many years now. And my goal is to continue doing these really till my last breath. I mean, that's just what I believe in and what I do. And I think the results speak for themselves in the sense of, how I look and how I feel. And when I do my blood work occasionally and see what those things look like, and really just my ability to be an effective and contributing member of society, because we need all of those people as much as we can today. It's a crazy world. There's a lot of just ridiculous stuff that I'm sure you see in your practice every day that I can't even believe is going on. So we need as many people contributing to society in a beneficial way as much as possible. And I want to do that till my last breath.
I love that. Well said, Dr. Lewis. Well said. I'll have to
Thank
pick your brain sometimes about menu items for a plant-based diet, because I know it can be challenging sometimes. And I know there's always that argument about, can you build muscle on a plant-based diet, and two camps to that. Obviously you can. There
Absolutely.
you go.
Absolutely.
Answer solved. Yeah. So I really appreciate it. For anyone who wants to learn more about the work you're doing, definitely head over to drlewisnutrition.com. Everything will be linked up in the show notes, description, the blog. So be sure to check it out. And without further ado, have a great, wonderful rest of your week, Dr. Lewis. Much appreciated.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, me too. You take care now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Hey, if you're getting value from this content and you haven't done so already, be sure to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel and podcast, and be sure to subscribe to the MHT newsletter. That way you don't miss out on any new content as it's released. Links in the description.